Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Bew. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. This week, we've got something special planned for you word nerds. We are joined by a friend of the podcast and author, Grace Tierney. Her latest book, Words Christmas Gave Us, explores the influence of Greeks, Romans, Vikings, Tudors, Dickens, and of course Santa Claus on worldwide traditions, merry music, decorations, feasts, and more. Pull on your Santa hat, make a wish, and let's dive into the words and history of Christmas with Words Christmas Gave Us author Grace Tierney. Grace, welcome back to Bunny Trails.
I'm really happy to be here. It's great to be back with you too.
And you have the new book, Words Christmas Gave Us. How was writing that?
I enjoyed it. It is very weird to write about Christmas at the wrong time of year. And obviously it took longer than a month to write it. So most of it was written at the wrong time of year.
Sure.
So that's a little bit peculiar. And you're chatting to friends and coming up with Christmas related facts. And they're going, why are you talking about this? It's April or it's September. So I think a lot of people now think I'm completely insane, but that was always going to creep out into the ethos at some point. It's been fun, and it's a time of year that I absolutely love, or I wouldn't be writing about it in the first place. So I can live with it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Wonderful.
Well, you've written several books about words, including How to Get Your Name in the Dictionary, Words the Sea Gave Us, and Words the Viking Gave Us. So what led you to the holidays with Words Christmas Gave Us?
Well, I love Christmas, but I think it probably started with a particular book. So there is a book called The Christmas Book, predictably enough, by an author called Enid Blyton. So I don't know how well known she is in the United States, but she would have been a massive best-selling children's author in Britain and Ireland from about the 1940s right up to the current time. So it's sort of the British Isles version of Dr. Seuss would be my way of putting it.
Okay.
And she wrote hundreds of books, just masses of them. And when I was about 12, I got this secondhand. So it's a story of a family in 1950s, kind of upper middle class Britain. They have servants, which I certainly did not have growing up. And it's about them celebrating Christmas, getting ready for Christmas and celebrating it. But she's done what I call education by stealth and explained traditions like holly, mistletoe, the Yule log, Christmas carols, mummer plays, and she's explained that through the story. So the dad explains some of them and the mom explains some of them. And I just loved it. And I read it every single Christmas Eve for way longer than I'm going to admit to. And then when I had my own children, I read it to them as well. Funnily enough, the copy I own doesn't actually have the last chapter. So I don't know how it ends because it was secondhand. I'm sure it was a happy ever after. It was that kind of story, like Santa comes, the whole thing. But it really got me into, I didn't know these stories about why we do the things we do at Christmas time. And that developed into a curiosity about that. And I thought, that was written in the 1950s. Things have moved on. There'll be new stories. And I did sort of my own version, but without the fictional family. Mine's all nonfiction.
I love hearing a lot of the traditions behind this because I know a lot of the traditions came from earlier celebrations that were already in place, and then they were basically adopted into what would become the more prominent holiday celebrations. So I think that's really interesting seeing where all these different inspirations came from to make what we celebrate today.
Yeah, I think that's really neat. I also love that you said stealth education by stealth. I like that storytelling to kind of teach, especially about traditions and different experiences. It's a great way for people to be exposed to those things. So that's intriguing. So I'm curious about that story as well, that book.
That's definitely always my approach, because you can write a really dry nonfiction book and that's fine. It's a good reference book, but people aren't really going to read the whole thing. We're just going to use the index, look up one thing and put it back in the shelf. Whereas this book particularly, it's more the story and, how it's different around the world, and what we may do could be completely different to a family in another country, but but we're still united by wanting to celebrate Christmas. And it's not even
Right.
fully a religious thing. It's a secular celebration as well. So I think if you have the little stories and the histories, that hooks people in and they learn, but they don't realize they're learning. So
Yeah.
that's education by stealth.
Wonderful. How do you think that language connects to the sense of nostalgia that people feel around Christmas?
So there's words that we only use at Christmas. So you would never say Merry Thursday, right?
Yeah.
Merry Christmas makes perfect sense. We know what it means. We just only ever use it at Christmas time. You're not going to be discussing things like frankincense and the nativity in the middle of July, unless you're like me and you're writing a book about it. But it is a lot of the words will actually trigger little memories. They're trigger warnings, but happy trigger warnings. So I can't hear the word manger without thinking about the mum of one of my childhood friends who cried every single time she heard the song Away in a Manger because it really got her in the feels because she was a mom and she was upset about the baby not having a crib.
Oh,
Oh,
She just couldn't listen to the word. For goose, it just my parents on one occasion cooked a goose in our oven at Christmas and the oven went on fire. That was the time we nearly burned down the house on Christmas Day. So you can't say goose
dear.
to anybody in my extended family without them saying, "Oh, do you remember?" That's what I love about Christmas is we all have our little crazy things, the time Aunt Mabel did whatever with the trifle. And, it makes us laugh and remember good, hopefully good things. The house did not burn down, by the way, and the goose was delicious. But
that's good. That's good.
but you say goose, and that's what I think. So you get into
Hmm.
the nostalgia instantly when you have the words.
I love that. Well, what was something you learned while researching this book that didn't make it into the final edition?
Yeah, I think you asked me this on the last book as well, and it's a sneaky one because, of course, we don't put everything in. You have to do some cutting. Otherwise, the book would be 3 times the size. But also, like I said, things need to have a good story. So the word toys is not in this book. And obviously, toys is a big deal at Christmas if you're a kid. But realistically, the story about the words toys is just not that exciting. So it was like, no, that's gone. There's some sort of a story about a Christmas pickle in the United States or some areas of the United States. I couldn't verify it, so it had to go. It's probably true, but I just couldn't prove it. I really wanted to include the Wexford Carol. Wexford's an area in Ireland where I am, and it's such a beautiful carol, but I just couldn't find enough story, so that was gone. I wanted to put in cinnamon, which comes from the inner bark of an evergreen tropical tree and is native to Sri Lanka, and that is literally all I could find out about it. So
Oh, wow.
cinnamon got the heave ho. So you can't put everything in. And then other stories I thought would be really, really short. And when you dig into them a bit more, you start getting more and more information. You're like, oh, wow, this is fascinating. But you can't include everything because of space. So some things got trimmed around the edges. But most of the words that I picked actually did end up in the book. Whereas sometimes I've had books where I've had to cull about a third of it because they just didn't quite fit. I think Christmas is a more defined theme. So it was
Right.
either in or it was out.
Sure, that makes sense. I was born and raised in the United States, and I did not know about the sometimes contentious nature of St. Stephen's Day versus Boxing Day until I read your book. So, can you tell us a little more about what that day is?
I absolutely can. So I'm going to start by asking both of you. So the 26th of December, do you just call that the 26th of December? Do you have a day off work even?
For me growing up in Texas, as far as family life, there was nothing special about that day other than eating a lot of leftovers and playing with the toys and things that we got. But no, it's not a federal holiday. It is, as far as I have ever celebrated, we have never done anything the day after Christmas.
My stepmother is actually, she spent many years in the UK. And so she talked about traditions around Boxing Day, but we didn't necessarily participate, but we often did something the day after Christmas as a family. So we would either find toys to donate or things like that. It was more, I don't know, it was more about this kind of like sharing or passing on the like that what we'd received. Like we received something, so we're
Yeah.
going to give away something. Um,
Yeah. That's
And so
lovely.
but yeah, I didn't really know that it was a specific day, or anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not surprised there's a connection to the UK because the Boxing Day thing is very much UK based. And I did ask a couple of other friends from Wales and France today because I happened to meet them whether they do it. So apparently in France, it's not a thing at all. You don't get a day off. She now lives in Ireland and she loves the fact that we do a bit more on St. Stephen's Day. And she's primarily seen it as that you do your family stuff on the 25th, but the 26th you see your friends.
I
Okay.
love
And
that.
it's Ireland, so that does tend to be in the pub, but not exclusively. just just want to say we don't all drink, okay? But it's a social space. And the other lady was from Wales but had grown up in the UK, so she immediately called it Boxing Day. She did not refer to it as St. Stephen's Day, and but it was more family based for her. And playing the board games, eating the leftovers, obviously they have to be eaten at some point. So it is quite a UK based thing, and I think this is why it's contentious in Ireland. So I'll get to that at
Yeah.
the end. So if you're from the UK or Australia or Canada, you're almost certainly going to call the 26th Boxing Day. And this comes from the very much from a charity-based thing, which connects in with your stepmom. So there would have been charity boxes in the churches, and people would donate during Advent, during the Christmas season, and they were broken open on St. Stephen's Day, and the alms were distributed to the needy, which is lovely. And then if you were an apprentice or I know that it's still done here with your mailman postman here, or somebody that collects your garbage or whatever, that you might give them a monetary tip or a tin of cookies or something as a thank you for all their work during the year. So that would be done. And sometimes, again, it was a physical box, sometimes ceramic, and they would smash it open, which is always quite satisfying, like a piggy bank, to get the money out. So that's lovely. And that's the Boxing Day tradition in the UK. But Ireland, you cannot call it Boxing Day. You really can't. You must call it St. Stephen's Day. And because it is the Saint Stephen was the first Christian martyr, and their feast day falls on the 26th. Um, so I think what's actually going on with it is it was a way to check if you were English or Irish in descent. I
Ah,
think it's shibboleth. So a word that you either know how to say or don't, and it tells people secretly what camp you belong in. So I think it was very much, if you said Boxing Day, certainly in the past in Ireland, you were probably better off, maybe Presbyterian, Anglican rather than Catholic. But if you said St. Stephen's Day, you were maybe less well off and you were Roman Catholic. Now, we're not divided on religious lines to that extent anymore. But let me tell you, if you want to annoy an Irish person, come in, particularly with an English accent, and say Boxing Day about the 26th, and there will be trouble. I mean, you're not going to get hit or anything, but somebody is going to tell you you're wrong. And it's
Right.
going to be within about 2 seconds of you saying it. So just don't go there.
that is very good to know.
Amazing. Yeah. Did you encounter any older terms that you felt should make a comeback?
Absolutely. And that's one of the parts of writing about words that I really love. I adore coming up with ones that people go, what on earth does that mean? And then you tell them and they go, "Oh, we don't have a word for that." And I was like, ah, but we do, just people aren't using it anymore. I am a big fan of expanding your vocabulary, and the weirder, the better. Okay. So the tagline for the blog is unusual words since 2009. And that's what I love. So my top three are crawmassing, scurry funge, and yolla book a flood.
Okay.
So crawmassing is to either beg for charity around town, so going out collecting with your box, I guess, or eating the leftovers from the feast. So maybe somebody that was lower down socially might be invited in by the landed gentry, and you can have the leftovers, which is great. And I think we all want to eat our leftovers because A, they're tasty, and B, it's good for the environment. So I think crawmassing needs to come back anyway. Then we have scurry funge, which is something I personally do, and I suspect lots of your listeners do as well at this time of year. It dates to the 1950s, and it is the frantic rush to tidy up before guests arrive. So if you have ever shoved things under the bed, into a closet, pulled over that door and locked it before your mother-in-law enters the house, you have scurry funged. And I do this every year.
That's
So
amazing.
if you're a bad housekeeper like I am, scurry funging is the way to go.
I believe I do that pretty much all year long. Anytime anyone's coming over,
Yeah.
there's this frantic thing about like, they're going to be here in like 20 minutes. Quick, everyone. Ah!
Clean the house. I mean, you'd swear I never cleaned it the rest of the time. And of course I do. But if somebody's coming, you're suddenly conscious of that pile of books in the corner or whatever.
Right. You
It's
see all the
exactly.
Scurry
things that
funging.
need to be done.
Yeah, that you had been overlooking for months, but now it
Mm.
has to be sorted. Yeah, that happens in my house all the time. Now, the last one technically isn't English, so I know I'm stretching it a little bit. I have a Japanese word in the book as well, but I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it. But Yola Boka flood is Icelandic, so it's the book flood. Okay, the flood of books. So this is an idea that on Christmas Eve, people exchange gifts of books, and it dates back to wartime rationing. So obviously they're on an island. It's harder to get supplies in, and add in a world war and you're going to have a problem, right? So one of the few things that wasn't rationed at Christmas time was paper. And everybody gave each other books. And I absolutely love this idea. A, because it was a great way to get around rationing, but B, because they still do it. So the entire country gets a book catalogue delivered by post into their house in the run up to Christmas. They pick out what they're going to give to all their different loved ones. And on Christmas Eve, you exchange the books, put on the candles, light the fire, curl up, and you all sit there and have a nice quiet read. I just think it sounds wonderful. After the rush and the scurry funging in the run up to Christmas Eve, just sit down and relax with your book. So I think we need more of
Yes.
that.
I
That's
love that.
beautiful. That's like I want this.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to steal that from the Icelanders. That's what I say.
Yeah. Well, we can
Absolutely.
share it. They can keep.
That's right. I always tell my students that it's not plagiarism if you cite your work, and so as long as I cite the
Yeah.
Icelanders here, it's fine.
Absolutely. And I don't think they'd object. And apparently something like 9 out of 10 Icelanders will publish a book at some point in their lives. Like they're huge writers and readers in Iceland anyway. So I think they would support it.
That is awesome. Dan from the future here, interrupting the interview to bring you a quick word of thanks from our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds, including a conversation about what everyone is reading, early access to the show, patrons-only polls, and our behind-the-scenes video, which always includes a little about our week before the show and a cool feature after the show.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork once a month made by Shauna, and awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe gets every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
Well, we know food plays a big role in holidays. So what is one of your favorite holiday traditions that relates to food?
I had a lot to pick from. I kind of go to town on the food thing. I think a lot of people do. And I love making things, so a lot of it's homemade. But the one that I'm going to talk about is gingerbread, because I make that with my daughter, who is now 19. So she's not the little sort of helper that she was when she first started doing this. But we basically make a massive amount of dough. It's a recipe that was given to me by my cousin, who sadly is no longer with us. So it's a nice way of remembering her as well when we do it. And I also collect unusual cookie cutters. So I counted, I have 32, and they're all hung up in my kitchen around the window. So it's not just little gingerbread men. It could be a lighthouse, it could be an elephant, it could be a moose. Um, Literally anything goes in our house at Christmas for the gingerbread. So we'll make up the dough and we just make dozens and dozens and dozens of cookies. We give them away, we eat them. And when I did the book launch in my local bookstore, I made loads of them, brought it along, told the story. And I thought, I've made masses. This will be fine. We'll get loads of these home. And it'll be such a nice treat to have a Christmas treat when it's not Christmas. Yeah, I got 4 left over. Four.
Ah.
I obviously did too good of a job of explaining how delicious the gingerbread was.
Yes. And a good
Um,
turnout for your thing.
Books, yeah.
I did, but let me tell you, they were punching above their weight. Like I didn't have hundreds at it. So it was really nice that everybody enjoyed them. That was very sweet. So on the blog, I have a little download section with a few just like little freebie bits of word history. And there's one about gingerbread that gives the whole history of gingerbread, and its connections go back to the Brothers Grimm. They popularized it. And the spices go back to the Crusades. So there's fabulous history in it, but the recipe is also on the download.
Oh,
So if you want to know how
awesome.
to make it, it's online on Wordfoolery.
Awesome. That is great.
Do you have any Christmas traditions that you look forward to each season?
I'm sure there are definitely people out there that go more out there than I do. I don't do the full lighting up the front of the house thing that some of my neighbors do. I have a couple of lights, but I don't go crazy on it. So not everything, but I like crafting and baking and all that kind of stuff. And if you're into that, you're kind of obliged to do it. And if you have young adults in the house, they will look at you very sternly if you don't make the gingerbread. Um, so there's the advent calendars will be going up, and the adults join in with the children on that one. So we get stuff too. We have a tradition of collecting baubles everywhere we travel. So, and they're not necessarily baubles. We've lots of very odd things. There's a Vegas gambling chip goes on the tree from one trip.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, the weirder the better. But that's really nice because when we're putting the decorations up on the tree, we're remembering all the trips that we've taken together or separately. And the children who are now adults have adopted that as well. So they've done some trips with their friends and they come back and go, I got a bauble for the tree. I think there's going to be a problem when they move out and they take half my Christmas tree baubles with them. But we will work that out when we get to that point. There will be, I don't know, custody arrangements over the baubles or something.
every other Christmas.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how we're going to do that, but we'll think of something. It'll give us an excuse to buy a few more baubles. We have a ridiculous quantity of baubles. Um, there's the making of the cranberry sauce, the gingerbread, the fudge, which they adore, but is so bad for you. I look in the pot and kind of go, none of the ingredients here are good for me at any level, but I'm going to make it anyway. And I only do it at Christmas, so that makes it a bit more special for the rest of the family. There's the pudding, there's the chestnut rolls. Like there's lots of proprietary sort of baking and making and stirring in the month beforehand. Do all my own cards. I love all the makey stuff. Yeah, so we've just got loads of traditions around that. And a lot of ours focus on Christmas Eve because that was always a day that we knew we could be together.
Mhm.
So sometimes Christmas Day we might need to visit people or go places, but Christmas Eve we'd always make sure we settle down at the end of the day and we'll curl up, there'll be treats, and we watch a Muppet Christmas Carol together. So that's how we get
Oh,
into
that's a great movie.
That's
I
really
love that
it.
movie.
Yeah, it's fabulous. And it's actually really accurate to the Dickens book. So it gets marks from me on the history as well.
I love it. I love it.
wonderful.
Roughly how long does I'm sure it varies greatly, but roughly how long since you've written several of these, word-based books, how long do those take? A couple years or
Yeah, I get asked this a lot. So there's the short answer and the long answer. The short answer is about 2 years, but the
Sure.
long answer is more accurate and it's a more like 5 or 6 years, because I'll start gathering words well in advance of even considering writing a book, because you do not want to be halfway through a book and go, oh, that's finished. And it's 20,000 words and you can't
Sure.
publish a book with 20,000 words. That's a pamphlet. Um,
Right.
like I'd love to do that and still get paid for it, but it won't work. And equally, you don't want it to be like a massive epic fantasy 2 inches thick tome either, because I think that would kill somebody if it fell on them in hardback for a start. Um, so yeah, I basically I'm always gathering words. So I have this massive document and I'll categorize them in there. And when I have a sort of a good few pages of words, it's kind of like, oh, there might be a book in that. And then I'll go into a whole different phase of bringing together the stories and doing the actual research. And as you said, some of them won't end up in the book, some will get chopped off at that stage. So I would say that usually I'm promoting one, drafting one, but I'm probably half bringing together one And it's not just one, it's probably 5 or 6 different ones. So weather is definitely happening. And the one after that will definitely be Words Stories gave us, which is going to kind of bring in things about folk tales, but also publishing and printing and words that various different authors invented, some of which are utterly hilarious. So I've got a good bit of that together, but it's not the next book, it's the book after. So I'm always looking about 2 or 3 books in advance.
I love it. I love it. Well, where can people find more of you?
Okay, so I'm word foolery across pretty much every social media platform. Too many social media platforms at this stage, but it's word foolery with an E-or-Y at the end. So wordfoolery.wordpress.com is the blog, and everything kind of runs out of that because that's how I got started on the history of words. So you'll be able to find the information about the various books, the newsletter, and my free downloads. For example, that history of gingerbread and the recipe that I mentioned earlier. There's even a crochet pattern to do a Christmas decoration. There's a variety of different things, but they're all about the words. So wordfoolery.wordpress.com.
Outstanding. We will link to that on the show notes and on our website as well. Well, Grace, thanks for joining us. Thanks for talking to us about words Christmas gave us. And we will recommend for everybody to go out and check out the book. And I may jump onto bookshop.org myself and get a couple of copies for upcoming Christmas gifts too.
Well, that's great. Thanks very much. The more, the merrier. And, just remember, books are really easy to wrap. So if you're as bad at wrapping as I am, something that's rectangular really helps.
That's very true. Have a Merry Christmas and happy every other holiday that falls into this very fun-filled December and January timeframe.
Absolutely. Happy Christmas to you too. And in Irish, that would be Nullag Hunagit.
Well, thanks again to Grace for joining us to talk about Words Christmas Gave Us. If you want to hear more from our interview with Grace, check out the behind-the-scenes video, which airs every Friday on our Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. And you can buy Words Christmas Gave Us on bookshop.org, which connects book buyers to independent booksellers all over the world. And of course, you can get it on Amazon in Kindle, paperback, and hardback. If you are looking for more ways to buy it worldwide, visit Grace's website, wordfoolery.wordpress.com, and click My Books. That's wordfoolery.wordpress.com and click My Books. That's about all we have time for today. If you have any thoughts on the show, reach out to us on Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
It's poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons, what is your favorite Winnie the Pooh character? The winner was Pooh, followed closely by Eeyore and Piglet.
This was a difficult choice for me because I like so many of them. When I was a kid, Tigger was by far my favorite. He was bouncy and energetic and unique, and I loved all of those things. And for a while, I was way more on the level with Eeyore, where things were a little rough and I had a hard time seeing the point. But I kept pressing on with my head down, surviving in spite of the hardship, just like resilient Eeyore. These days, I really understand Pooh Bear a lot more. I'm never the smartest guy in the room. I enjoy my simple pleasures. I really like my routine, and I just want to take life at a slow, deliberate pace and get new experiences in short bursts, and then go back to my safe place to rest. I think the ensemble characters of Winnie the Pooh really highlight a lot of different personality types and how they can all get together, and I really enjoy that.
Heather says, quote, my family calls me Eeyore, so that's a pretty big clue as to my personality. I do remember really loving Owl from the cartoons in the 80s, but each character has something special about them, end quote. I agree, Heather. Each character has something really special about them. Piglet was always a dedicated and amazing friend. Pooh has Taoist wisdom for the ages, and Eeyore always showed up despite a desire to introvert and or his various moods. They're all very different and don't try to change one another, and I think it's the best. As a kid, I loved that the books and the cartoons never spoke down. That is, they don't treat children like they can't understand the themes or circumstances or emotions of the characters. My aunt introduced classic Winnie the Pooh to my kids, and the collection became a favorite of my son's as well.
When he was a teenager, my son told me that A.A. Milne taught him what true friendships are supposed to be, and that it isn't worth it to hang around waiting for someone who doesn't really care about you in the hopes that they'll figure it out. Even without my own reasons, the insight it provided my son would make Winnie the Pooh and friends one of my all-time favorite groups of characters.
That is a very good life lesson and good to be learned in your teenage years.
Yes. Well, as a reminder, our silly pulls mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid, and patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll. And head over to bookshop.org to find Grace Tierney's newest book, Words Christmas Gave Us, at your local independent bookseller. Or you can find all of Grace's work, including her weekly blogs and other fun word stuff at wordfoolery.wordpress.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, remember,
Words belong to their users.